is that Keir Starmer wants Andy Burnham back in Westminster, or certainly his allies want him back in Westminster, like a hole in the head. He really does not want this to happen.
Of course, we've been talking all morning about the potential of a return to Westminster for Andy Burnham, the former Labour MP and government minister, who is currently the mayor of Greater Manchester. Let's check in with the Times political editor, Stephen Swinford. Morning, Steve. Hello, Steve.
Hello.
We've got you. Thanks very much for joining us. Got you now. What are you hearing then this morning about Andy Burnham and his intentions? Are they becoming any clearer at this point?
They are not clear at this point, but what is very clear is that Keir Starmer wants Andy Burnham back in Westminster, or certainly his allies want him back in Westminster, like a hole in the head. He really does not want this to happen, and people are chucking the kind of kitchen sink in every form at Andy Burnham, saying the rule book's going to make it impossible for you. If you do this, you waste hundreds of thousands with the mayoralty contest for the mayor of Greater Manchester. It's an ego-driven thing. There's opprobrium, there's insults. So there is a big operation, a Stop Andy Burnham operation. And in the face of that, it wouldn't surprise me if Andy Burnham looks at it and goes, OK, well, actually, there are a lot of risks with this. There are no guarantees to get to the point where he'd actually sit in Parliament. So many things can go wrong, and he doesn't go for it. But at the same time, this might be his one big chance to get back into Westminster. So he's got a lot to weigh up, and we think we might be hearing from him a bit this weekend. There's a kind of event, I think, a Labour North West event happening tomorrow, so eventually we'll get some clarity on his position. But I think at the moment he's happy to keep the prospect of that dangling out there, and Starmer allies are just going out of their way to say absolutely not.
There's a thin line or a difficult line to walk for number 10 in all of this, who were, I think, more eager to sort of slap down his leadership ambitions during the Labour Party or in the build-up to the Labour Party conference, Steve. But now there's a realistic prospect of progress towards Westminster for Burnham. Perhaps they're having to hedge their bets a little more carefully.
Indeed, and if you hear what Keir Starmer's got to say on it, he of course is not saying any of the things I just said to you publicly, but he is saying it's a matter for the NEC, which is the ruling body of the Labour Party. And look, he is right, it is a matter for the NEC. It just so happens that the bulk of the NEC, the majority on it, is controlled by one Keir Starmer. So that's the challenge here, that he does actually have power to decide whether Andy Burnham can run or does not run. So there is we've got days of psychodrama if Andy Burnham doesn't make clear that he's not running for it, to play out over will he, won't he, will Starmer block him, won't he, and all of the arguments, the internal arguments within the NEC about this process. You're going to see, I predict, lots of stories with the kind of 30-odd members of the NEC quoted anonymously in terms of what they think about Andy Burnham, and opinions vary. Some people really want him in. The unions think it'd be outrageous to block him, and others are categorically opposed and think it would just kind of be a disaster for the Labour Party as a whole. Yeah. But either way, the prince across the water now appears to have a path back to Westminster, and that is an irresistible narrative.
It's a bit more realistic than it once was, or even a few months ago. Shall we go on to some of the other stories around today? President Trump provoking outrage with his comments that NATO and British troops, quote, kept themselves away from the front line in Afghanistan. Understandably, Steve, this is meeting unanimous criticism from people who are not ignorant about such things.
Yeah, I mean, across the border, British the soldiers died in Afghanistan in their hundreds, and they died in their hundreds in Iraq, and it has caused extreme upset to the families. But also, there is cross-party consensus on this, that those comments were just plain offensive. And I think what's interesting is that we had got to the stage where Number 10 was feeling quietly pleased about how the Greenland situation had gone. It had opted for diplomacy, it hadn't gone over the top, and in the end, Trump had backed down. But on the way out, Trump has just thrown this insult at those servicemen and women who died fighting for their country and as part of the NATO alliance, and that's caused extreme consternation. And so you've seen the minister go out on the airwaves this morning and make clear that we don't agree with that, and we will be raising that with Trump in the near future. But Trump can't help himself. He just creates news wherever he goes, including on the way out of a massive row over Greenland as he flew back to the US.
We had Sir Simon Sharma on the programme this morning, the historian, who told us that the UK must recognise the stiff dose of reality that America is no longer an ally. He was, of course, reflecting on events in Davos this week, Steve. I just wonder, as the week ends, we're in a slightly different position, or maybe a dramatically different position than we were at the beginning of the week, and that is all down to Donald Trump and his comments and his speeches and his interventions. A few days ago, he was threatening to invade a NATO country.
I think the idea that the US is no longer an ally. If you ask people in Number 10 that, they would categorically reject that, because they would point, probably rightly, to the fact that NATO without the US really would be a much far significant force, and more broadly, Britain without the US would struggle economically. So there is a yes, it is more capricious. We never know what Trump is going to do. It's less predictable, but he is still broadly seen as an ally and supportive, but it's far less reliable than it ever was before, because quite simply you don't know what he's going to do next in either his rhetoric, his policy, or his intent. And he seems to have a significant bee in his bonnet about NATO as an organisation and Europe more broadly. And the interesting thing in Starmer's interviews about this yesterday was he was saying this makes the case for closer ties with Europe. Those are trading ties, military ties, defence ties, security. So you're going to see a very overt policy from the government of trying to move closer to Europe whilst also trying to retain what is left of the special relationship, because America obviously still matters a great deal.
Steve, great to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's the Times political editor, Steve Swinford. I'm just having a rogue thought. I think there is no world in which this happened, but imagine Sir Keir Starmer endorsed the idea of Andy Burnham running to be the MP in the Gorton and Denton constituency and said, yes, Andy, go for it. You've got my full support. You've done great things as the Mayor of Greater Manchester. You'll do great things as the MP for the area. Would that be enough to welcome Burnham in and neutralise a leadership challenge, because Burnham would then be seen to be so disloyal that if he was to launch a leadership challenge, everyone would look at him and go, hang on a second, the PM had your back a couple of months ago, what are you doing now?